Welcome to The Secret's Revenge, where powerful stories of betrayal, justice, and redemption come to life. Follow along as a father figure shares gripping tales filled with wisdom, emotion, and unexpected twists. Sit back and experience revenge told with calm strength and unforgettable impact. My wife files for divorce, and my 7-year-old daughter asks the judge, "May I show you something that Dad doesn't know about, Your Honor?" The judge nodded. When the video started, the entire courtroom froze in silence. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought my life would crumble in a courthouse on a Tuesday morning in October. My name is Dennis. I'm 63 years old, and until that day, I believed I understood my world. I had been married to Amanda for 15 years. We had built what I thought was a solid life together with our 7-year-old daughter, Skylar. I worked as a regional sales manager for an industrial equipment company. Amanda managed a small boutique downtown, and Skylar was the light of both our lives, or so I thought. The courthouse smelled like old wood and disinfectant. I sat in a hard wooden chair, hands folded in my lap, trying to process what Amanda's lawyer had just said. Irreconcilable differences were the words on the papers. But sitting there, listening to him paint me as some kind of neglectful husband and absent father, I felt like I was in the wrong courtroom, hearing about someone else's life. Amanda sat across the aisle with her attorney, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit who kept shuffling through papers like she was building a case against a criminal. Every time I tried to catch Amanda's eye, she looked away, jaw set in a way I'd never seen before. This wasn't the woman who used to curl up next to me on Sunday mornings or who called me at work just to hear my voice. This Amanda was cold, distant, like a stranger wearing my wife's face. Skylar sat between us in the gallery, her small hands clutching a worn stuffed elephant she'd had since she was 3. She was supposed to be in school, but Amanda had insisted she needed to be here. Every few minutes, Skylar would look at me with those big brown eyes, and I could see confusion there that mirrored my own. Amanda's lawyer presented a timeline of our marriage that I barely recognized. According to him, I had been emotionally absent for years, prioritizing work over family. Leaving Amanda to raise Skylar essentially as a single parent, missed school events, late dinners, weekend work calls, some of it was true. I had worked hard, maybe too hard. But the way he presented it made me sound like a monster who didn't care about his family. Mr. Patterson regularly worked 60 to 70-hour weeks, he said, reading from his notes, was frequently away on business trips, and showed little interest in his daughter's daily activities or emotional needs. Each word felt like a physical blow. I wanted to stand up and shout that everything I did was for them. That every extra hour at work was so Skylar could have dance lessons, so Amanda could have her boutique, so we could afford the house in the suburbs with the big backyard where Skylar played. But sitting there, watching Amanda nod along with every accusation, I started to doubt myself. Maybe I had been absent, maybe I had let work consume me. Maybe I had failed them both without even realizing it. The worst part was Amanda's demeanor. She wasn't crying or grieving the end of 15 years. She seemed almost relieved. There was tension in her shoulders, but not heartbreak, not grief. When she finally looked at me, there was something in her eyes I couldn't identify, not sadness, not anger, something calculating. During a brief recess, I tried to approach her in the hallway. "Amanda, please." I kept my voice low so Skylar wouldn't hear. "Can we talk about this? I know I haven't been perfect, but we can work on it. Counseling, I can change my schedule." She cut me off with a shake of her head. "It's too late, Dennis. I've made my decision. You'll understand eventually. But why now? Just last month we were talking about taking Skylar to Disney World for her birthday." She glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. "Some things can't be fixed. Some betrayals go too deep." Before I could ask what she meant, her lawyer appeared and guided her away. I stood alone in that hallway, more confused than ever. When we returned to the courtroom, I noticed Skylar watching her mother with an expression that seemed too mature for a 7-year-old, something almost analytical, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. When Amanda caught her looking, Skylar quickly turned away and focused on her stuffed elephant. As Amanda's lawyer continued, requesting primary custody of Skylar, the house we'd bought together 5 years ago, and substantial spousal support, I felt my entire world shifting beneath me. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. This was the systematic dismantling of everything I'd worked for. But something else nagged at me, the way Amanda kept checking her watch. The nervous glances toward the gallery. The way her lawyer seemed almost too prepared, like they'd been planning this for a very long time. And most disturbing of all, the way Skylar kept looking back and forth between us, her small face creased with worry about something more than just her parents' divorce. I had no idea that in less than an hour, my 7-year-old daughter would turn that courtroom upside down and reveal a truth so shocking it would change everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd loved and trusted for 15 years. Sitting in that courtroom, listening to my life being dissected by strangers, I started to remember things that hadn't seemed important at the time, but now felt like pieces of a puzzle I should have solved. It had started around 6 months ago, maybe longer. Amanda had become distant in subtle ways I'd attributed to stress. She'd always been social, chatting on the phone with friends or her sister, but suddenly those conversations became hushed, secretive. When I'd walk into a room, she'd quickly end calls or close her laptop. When I asked about it, she'd smile that bright smile I'd fallen in love with and say it was just girl talk. Boutique drama. I remembered one evening about 3 months ago. I'd come home from a business trip to find Amanda in the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear, speaking in a voice so low I could barely make out the words. When she saw me, she immediately straightened and said loudly, "Oh yes, that fabric order sounds perfect. Have it delivered next week." But when she hung up, she seemed flustered in a way that didn't match talking to a supplier. Then there were the changes in Skylar. My little girl had always been cheerful and talkative, running to greet me when I came home, eager to share stories about school. But gradually she'd become quieter, more withdrawn. She'd still hug me goodnight, but there was something different in her eyes, like she was watching me, studying me. The sleeping arrangements had changed too, so gradually I barely noticed. First, Amanda complained that my snoring was keeping her awake. Then she said she had trouble sleeping and didn't want to disturb me. Eventually, she'd moved to the guest room, just temporarily, while she worked through what she called a bout of insomnia. I'd suggested she see a doctor. She'd brushed it off. But the most troubling change had been in how Amanda interacted with Skylar. More secretive, whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Shopping trips that lasted longer than necessary. When they'd return, both of them would seem oddly quiet, like they shared something I wasn't part of. I'd tried to talk to Skylar about it once. We were sitting in her bedroom, and I was helping her with homework when I noticed she seemed sad. "Is everything okay, sweetheart?" She looked up at me with those serious brown eyes. "Daddy, do you know when someone is lying to you?" The question caught me off guard. "That's a grown-up kind of question. Why do you ask?" She shrugged, suddenly interested in her pencil eraser. "Just wondering. Sometimes people say things that don't match what they do." I made a mental note to talk to Amanda about it. When I brought it up later, she dismissed it as typical 7-year-old confusion about adult behavior. Now, sitting in that courtroom, I realized how naive I'd been. During a pause in the proceedings, I glanced over at Skylar. She was sitting very still, her stuffed elephant in her lap, but her eyes were alert and focused on every word being spoken. Then she reached into her small backpack and pulled out a tablet computer. I recognized it as the one Amanda had bought her for educational games a few months ago. Skylar held it carefully, like it contained something precious or dangerous. "Daddy," she whispered, leaning closer. "I need to tell someone something important." "What is it, sweetheart?" She glanced around nervously, then whispered even quieter. "I have something that shows the truth." Before I could ask what she meant, Amanda's lawyer called Amanda to the stand. I watched my wife of 15 years stand up, smooth down her dress, and walk to the witness chair with the confidence of someone who had everything planned out. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and began answering questions about our marriage with the ease of someone who'd rehearsed every word. Every word she spoke sounded reasonable, even sympathetic. She painted herself as a devoted wife who had tried everything to save the marriage, a protective mother who had finally realized she needed to put Skylar first. She talked about my long hours, my business trips, my supposed emotional unavailability. Some of what she said contained grains of truth, which made it all the more painful to hear. But I kept thinking about Skylar's words. I have something that shows the truth. What could a 7-year-old possibly have that would be relevant to divorce proceedings? And why did my daughter look more nervous about her mother's testimony than I felt? As Amanda continued speaking, I noticed Skylar gripping the tablet tighter. Her knuckles were white. She kept glancing between her mother and the judge with an expression I'd never seen on her before, determination mixed with fear. Like she was steeling herself to do something that scared her, but that she knew was right. When Amanda's lawyer asked her about the effect of my neglect on Skylar, Amanda's voice took on a tone I didn't recognize. Something theatrical that didn't match the private woman I'd known for 15 years. That's when Skylar stood up. The courtroom fell silent as my 7-year-old daughter raised her small hand and said in a clear, steady voice, "Your Honor, may I please show you something that my daddy doesn't know about?" The silence was deafening. Every head turned toward my daughter as she stood there, clutching her tablet, her voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. The judge, a middle-aged woman with kind but serious eyes, looked surprised but not dismissive. "What is it you'd like to show me, young lady?" Judge Morrison asked, her tone gentle but professional. Amanda had gone completely pale. Her confident demeanor cracked for the first time all morning. Her lawyer immediately stood up. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The child hasn't been called as a witness, and we have no idea what—" "Sit down, counselor," Judge Morrison said firmly. "If this child has something relevant to these proceedings, I'm going to hear it." She looked back at Skylar with encouraging eyes. "Come up here, sweetheart. What's your name?" "Skylar Patterson. I'm 7 years old. I live with my mommy and daddy, but mommy wants to take me away from daddy, and that's not fair because daddy didn't do the bad things." I watched Amanda shift in the witness chair. Her hands gripping the armrests, so tightly her knuckles had turned white. There was something in her expression I'd never seen before, not just nervousness, genuine fear. "What do you have there, Skylar?" the judge asked. "It's my tablet. Mommy gave it to me for games and learning, but I also figured out how to make videos with it." Skylar's voice was steady, but I could see her hands trembling slightly. "I made some videos because I was worried about mommy and daddy, and I wanted to understand why mommy was acting different." Judge Morrison nodded thoughtfully. "And what did you discover?" "I discovered that mommy has been lying, not just little lies, big lies. Lies about daddy and lies about what she really wants." Skylar looked directly at Amanda, and for a moment I saw my wife flinch as if she'd been struck. Amanda's lawyer jumped up again. "Your Honor, this is completely inappropriate. A child cannot—" I said sit down. The judge's voice carried the authority of someone who would not be argued with. "Skylar, can you show me one of these videos?" My daughter nodded and tapped the screen. Even from where I sat, I could hear audio beginning to play. Amanda's voice came through the speaker. But it was Amanda in a way I had never heard her before. Cold, calculating, almost cruel. "Of course I don't love him anymore, Marcus. I haven't loved Dennis in years. He's just been useful, you know. A steady paycheck, someone to pay the mortgage and Skylar's expenses while I figured out my next move." My blood turned to ice. Who was Marcus? The voice on the recording continued, and I realized with growing horror that this was my wife talking about me like I was some kind of convenience, not the man she'd promised to love and honor. "The best part is he's so trusting, so naive. He has no idea about us, no idea about any of it. He just goes to work every day like a good little provider while I plan our future together. Once the divorce goes through and I get the house and spousal support, we can finally be together properly." The courtroom erupted. Amanda's lawyer was on her feet objecting loudly. My lawyer, who had seemed overwhelmed by Amanda's accusations just minutes before, was suddenly very alert. But all I could focus on was the roaring in my ears and the feeling that the floor had dropped out from under me. Once order was restored, Judge Morrison turned back to Skylar. "When did you make this recording?" "About 6 weeks ago." "I made lots of them because I was trying to understand why Mommy kept saying mean things about Daddy when Daddy wasn't there, but then being nice to Daddy when he was home. It made me confused and sad." She swiped to another video. This one showed Amanda in our kitchen, with a man I'd never seen before, tall, dark-haired, maybe in his 40s. And they were kissing with the kind of passion I hadn't seen from Amanda in years. "Who is this man, Skylar?" the judge asked gently. "Mommy calls him Marcus. He comes over when Daddy is at work. Sometimes they go into Mommy's room and close the door for a long time. Sometimes they sit at the kitchen table and talk about money and houses and how to make Daddy give Mommy everything she wants." Each word landed like a blow. 15 years of marriage. 15 years of working extra hours, missing some dinners and school events because I wanted to give them the best life possible. And all that time, Amanda had been planning to take everything from me, but it got worse. Skylar showed another video, more recent, where Amanda was coaching someone on the phone about what to say during the divorce proceedings. "Just stick to the story we discussed." Dennis was emotionally absent, never available for Skylar, prioritized work over family. "Don't mention anything else." The lawyer says judges are sympathetic to mothers who feel neglected and unsupported. Then Amanda's voice turned colder. "Once this is over and I have primary custody and the house, Skylar won't have to see much of him anyway. Kids adapt. She'll forget about him eventually. Especially once Marcus and I are married and she has a real father figure." I felt like I was going to be sick. Not only was Amanda planning to take my daughter away from me, she was planning to replace me entirely. And she thought Skylar would just forget about me, like I was some temporary inconvenience in their lives. But my little girl, my 7-year-old daughter, had been protecting me all along. She'd been gathering evidence because she could see what I was too blind to see, that her mother was lying, manipulating, planning to destroy our family for her own selfish reasons. "Skylar," I said, my voice hoarse with emotion, "why didn't you tell me about this?" She turned to me with tears in her eyes. "I tried to, Daddy. I asked you about lying, remember? But I was scared that if I told you, Mommy would be angry and take me away from you faster. I thought maybe if I had proof, someone could help us." Amanda finally found her voice. "This is ridiculous. A child's recordings can't be used as evidence. She doesn't understand what she saw. She's confused, making things up. Are you saying the voice on these recordings isn't yours, Mrs. Patterson?" Judge Morrison asked coldly. Amanda's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Skylar wiped her nose with the back of her hand and looked up at the judge. "I have 17 videos, Your Honor. Do you want to see more?" For the first time since we'd entered that courtroom, I felt something other than despair. Judge Morrison called for a 30-minute recess to review the videos privately in her chambers, along with both lawyers. As the courtroom cleared, I sat in stunned silence trying to process the magnitude of what Skylar had revealed. Amanda had fled to the hallway with her lawyer. Their heated whispers carried back through the partially open doors. I caught fragments: damage control, inadmissible, child's misunderstanding. But her lawyer's tone suggested they both knew the evidence was damning. Skylar climbed into the seat next to me, still clutching her tablet. "Are you mad at me, Daddy?" I pulled her close, my throat tight. "Mad at you? Sweetheart, you're the bravest person I know, but I'm so sorry you had to see and hear those things. A little girl shouldn't have to worry about protecting her daddy." She leaned against my shoulder. "I knew something was wrong when Mommy started being mean about you when you weren't there." She would say things like you didn't really love us, that you cared more about work than family. But I know that's not true because you always tuck me in and help with my homework and take me to the park on weekends. My heart ached thinking about Amanda poisoning our daughter's mind against me, even as she planned to take everything I'd worked for. When court reconvened, Judge Morrison's expression was grim. She'd clearly seen enough to understand the situation completely. Amanda looked like she might collapse, all pretense of the wronged wife finally abandoned. "Mrs. Patterson," the judge said sternly, "I've reviewed several of your daughter's recordings. Would you care to explain the content of these videos?" Amanda's lawyer whispered something to her. She shook her head. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Those recordings are taken out of context, private conversations that a child couldn't possibly understand." "I see. So you're not denying that the voice on the recordings is yours?" Amanda's silence was answer enough. Judge Morrison turned to Skylar. "Sweetheart, can you show us the video you mentioned about money and houses?" Skylar nodded and pulled up another recording. This one was recent, maybe 2 weeks ago. The audio was crystal clear. Amanda and Marcus, sitting in what I recognized as our dining room, planning out the divorce strategy like they were discussing a business deal. "The lawyer says I should ask for spousal support of at least $4,000 a month," Amanda's voice said on the recording. "Dennis makes almost $90,000 a year, so it's reasonable. Plus, I want the house. It's worth about $350,000 now, and we only owe $200,000 on the mortgage." Marcus's voice responded, and hearing him speak in my house made my stomach turn. "What about his retirement account?" "That's trickier, but she thinks we can get half of that too. He's been contributing to it for 20 years, so there's probably close to $200,000 in there. The key is making sure I get primary custody of Skylar. Once I have that, everything else falls into place." "And you're sure he doesn't suspect anything?" Amanda actually laughed. "Dennis, he's completely clueless. He's so buried in work, and so trusting that I could probably have an affair right in front of him, and he'd find a way to rationalize it. He still believes we're just going through a rough patch." The casual cruelty in her voice, as she discussed dismantling my life, was breathtaking. This wasn't the woman I'd fallen in love with. The woman who'd cried tears of joy when Skylar was born. The woman who told me just last year that I was her best friend and the love of her life. But Skylar wasn't done. In one recording, Amanda was on the phone discussing how to make me look bad during the custody evaluation. I need to emphasize how he's never available for Skylar's emotional needs. He provides financially, sure, but emotionally he's absent. I'll mention how he missed her school play last month because of a work trip, and how he's always on his phone during dinner. What Amanda didn't mention was that the work trip was mandatory training. I'd tried to reschedule. That I'd video called Skylar every night to hear about her day. That I was only on my phone during dinner when Amanda herself was texting me questions about the boutique's finances. Another recording showed Amanda coaching Skylar on what to say if anyone asked about her parents. "If someone asks you about Daddy, just say that he works a lot and isn't home much. You don't need to say anything bad, just that he's always busy with work." But in the recording, 7-year-old Skylar pushed back. "But Daddy isn't always working. He plays with me and reads to me and makes pancakes on Saturday mornings." "Well, yes, but he misses a lot of things too." "Doesn't he? That was only one time, and he came to the real recital and brought flowers." I could hear the frustration building in Amanda's voice. "Skylar, grown-up relationships are complicated. Daddy and I aren't happy together anymore, and sometimes when people aren't happy, they need to live in different houses. Wouldn't you rather have Mommy be happy?" The manipulation was so subtle, so insidious. Amanda was trying to program our daughter to accept the divorce as inevitable, even desirable, while quietly painting me as the reason for the family's problems. But the most devastating recording came last. It was from just 3 days ago, 3 days before Amanda filed for divorce. Amanda was talking to Marcus about their future. "Once everything is settled, and Dennis is out of the picture, We can finally live the life we've been dreaming about. The house is perfect for us, and with his spousal support payments, we'll have plenty of money. Skylar will adjust. Kids are resilient, and if Dennis wants to see her, he can have every other weekend. That's generous enough. What if he fights for more custody? Marcus asked. Amanda's laugh was cold. With what? I have documentation of his neglect, witnesses who will testify to his absence from family events, evidence of emotional unavailability. His own work schedule proves he can't provide adequate care for a child. No judge is going to give primary custody to a workaholic father over a devoted mother. The arrogance in her voice was staggering. She'd been planning this for months, maybe years. Building a case against me while I worked to support our family, never suspecting that the woman I loved was systematically destroying my reputation and planning to steal my daughter. As the final recording ended, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of Amanda crying. But these weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of someone who'd been caught and was facing the consequences of her own choices. Judge Morrison removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. Mrs. Patterson, in my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such calculated deception in a family court. You've not only betrayed your husband's trust and manipulated these proceedings, but you've attempted to use your own child as a pawn in your scheme. Amanda's lawyer made one last desperate attempt. Your Honor, while these recordings are concerning, we maintain that they represent private conversations taken out of context by a child who doesn't understand adult relationships. The judge's response was swift and final. Counselor, there is no context that makes planning to defraud your spouse and manipulate custody proceedings acceptable. These recordings show premeditated deception, adultery, and financial fraud. I'm ordering an immediate recess to allow Mr. Patterson's attorney to file appropriate counterclaims. As Amanda realized that her carefully constructed plan was crumbling, she finally showed her true nature. She turned to Skylar with an expression of pure rage that made me instinctively move to protect my daughter. You little brat, she hissed. You've ruined everything. Do you have any idea what you've done? That was the moment I knew with absolute certainty that my daughter and I were going to be just fine without Amanda. Because the woman I'd been married to for 15 years had just revealed that she cared more about her deception than she did about her own child's well-being. The aftermath of Skylar's revelations transformed the courtroom into something I'd never experienced before. What had begun as Amanda's calculated attempt to destroy me had become her own undoing. I watched as the woman I'd trusted for 15 years faced the consequences of her elaborate deception. My lawyer, Robert Chen, who had initially seemed overwhelmed by Amanda's accusations, was now energized in a way I hadn't seen before. Dennis, he said, pulling me aside during the recess, this changes everything. We're not just defending against her claims anymore. We're going on the offense. What your daughter captured on those videos is evidence of adultery, fraud, manipulation of custody proceedings, and attempted alienation of parental affection. What does that mean for Skylar and me? It means we're filing for primary custody. And given what we've seen today, I'm confident we'll get it. But more than that, Amanda's claims for spousal support and property division are now completely undermined. She's been planning this deception for months, possibly years. That shows premeditation and fraud. As we prepared to return to court, Skylar sat quietly beside me, her tablet carefully tucked away in her backpack. The weight of what she'd done seemed to have settled on her small shoulders. Daddy, she said softly, is Mommy going to be in trouble? I knelt down to her level. Mommy made some very bad choices, sweetheart. When grown-ups lie and try to hurt other people, there are consequences. But none of this is your fault. You were brave and you did the right thing. She nodded, but I could see the sadness in her eyes. Despite everything Amanda had done, Skylar was still a 7-year-old who loved her mother. When court reconvened, the entire dynamic had shifted. Judge Morrison's demeanor toward Amanda had changed from professional neutrality to barely controlled contempt. Amanda, for her part, had abandoned all pretense. She sat slumped in her chair, occasionally glaring at Skylar with an anger that made my blood boil. "Mrs. Patterson," Judge Morrison began, "before we proceed further, I want you to understand the gravity of your situation. The evidence presented today suggests multiple violations of court proceedings, potential fraud, and what appears to be a deliberate attempt to manipulate custody arrangements for financial gain." Amanda's new strategy was defiance. "Your Honor, I maintain that those recordings were taken without my knowledge by a child who doesn't understand adult relationships. Private conversations between consenting adults shouldn't." "Stop right there," the judge interrupted sharply. "These weren't just private conversations. These recordings show you planning to commit perjury in my courtroom, deliberately attempting to alienate your child from her father, and conspiring to defraud your husband in divorce proceedings. The fact that your 7-year-old daughter felt compelled to document your behavior because she recognized it as wrong should tell you something about your actions." My lawyer stood. "Your Honor, based on the evidence presented, we're filing a motion for immediate emergency custody of Skylar Patterson, as well as a complete reversal of the original divorce petition. We're also requesting that all of Mrs. Patterson's claims for spousal support and property division be dismissed based on her fraudulent behavior." What happened next removed any lingering sympathy I might have felt for Amanda. As the judge was explaining the temporary custody arrangements, Amanda turned to Skylar with venom in her voice. "Are you happy now, you little brat? You've destroyed your own family. When you're older and understand what you've done, you'll realize you've ruined your mother's life for nothing." The cruelty of blaming a 7-year-old child for her own bad choices was breathtaking. Skylar began to cry, not from fear, but from the pain of hearing her mother's anger directed at her for telling the truth. That's when something inside me finally snapped. For 15 years, I'd been accommodating, trusting, willing to blame myself for any problems in our marriage. I'd listened to Amanda's accusations in court and wondered if maybe I really had been a bad husband and father. But watching her attack our daughter for her courage made me realize that I wasn't the problem. I never had been. I stood up, my voice carrying across the courtroom with an authority I didn't know I possessed. "Your Honor, I request that Mrs. Patterson's visitation be limited to professional supervised settings only. A mother who would blame a child for exposing her lies is not someone who should have unsupervised access to that child." Amanda whirled around to face me, her mask completely dropped. "You self-righteous bastard. You think you're so perfect with your steady job and your responsible provider act, but you were boring. Do you hear me? Boring and predictable and completely inadequate as a husband. Bailiff, please escort Mrs. Patterson from my courtroom," Judge Morrison said. "We'll proceed with the custody arrangements without her disruptive presence." As Amanda was led away, still shouting about the injustice of it all, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not anger, not vindication. Peace. The woman who'd been poisoning our family with her lies and manipulation was finally gone, and for the first time in months, I could breathe freely. Skylar slipped her small hand into mine. "Daddy, are we going to be okay?" I looked down at my daughter, this brave little girl who'd had the courage to stand up for the truth when the adults around her were failing. And I smiled with more confidence than I'd felt in years. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going to be more than okay. We're going to be free." 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our house, my house now, making pancakes on a Saturday morning, watching Skylar color at the kitchen table. The morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the space that had once felt contaminated by Amanda's deception, but now felt like home again. The silence was different now. Not the heavy, uncomfortable quiet of hidden secrets, but the peaceful calm of honesty and trust. The legal proceedings had concluded 3 months after that devastating day in court. Amanda's attempts to appeal the custody decision had failed spectacularly when her lawyer discovered additional evidence of financial manipulation. She'd been siphoning money from the boutique's accounts to fund her relationship with Marcus. The business partners she'd defrauded pressed charges, and Amanda found herself facing not just divorce consequences, but potential criminal prosecution. Marcus had disappeared the moment Amanda's scheme unraveled. The man who'd been so eager to help plan my downfall had no interest in sticking around when there was no money to steal and no house to claim. Amanda's grand love affair had been as much of an illusion as everything else in her carefully constructed deception. Skylar had adjusted to our new life with a resilience that both amazed and worried me. We'd started seeing a family therapist, Dr. Sarah Martinez, who specialized in helping children cope with family trauma. Through our sessions, I'd begun to understand just how much Skylar had been carrying during those months when Amanda was planning her betrayal. She's been carrying the weight of adult secrets for far too long, Dr. Martinez had explained during one of our early sessions. Children her age shouldn't have to be the truth-tellers in a family. The fact that she felt compelled to document her mother's behavior tells us she recognized that something was fundamentally wrong. But she didn't know who to trust with that information. During therapy, Skylar had revealed more about those months leading up to the divorce. Amanda hadn't just been coaching her to minimize my role in her life. She'd been actively trying to turn Skylar against me with subtle manipulation and outright lies. Mommy used to tell me that Daddy didn't really want to spend time with me, Skylar had shared during one session. Her small voice, matter-of-fact in the way children can be when discussing painful truths. She said that's why he worked so much, because work was more fun than being with us. But I knew that wasn't true, because Daddy always seemed happy when he came home. And he always wanted to hear about my day. Learning about Amanda's attempts to poison my relationship with my own daughter had been one of the most painful revelations of the entire ordeal. But it had also helped me understand why Skylar had been so determined to gather evidence. She'd been protecting our relationship as much as she'd been protecting me. The custody evaluation had been a formality. Amanda's supervised visits had gone poorly from the start. During the first session, she'd spent the entire hour trying to convince Skylar that recording the videos had been wrong, that she'd ruined the family by telling the truth. The supervising social worker had documented Amanda's attempts to manipulate the child and recommended that visitation be reduced to once per month under strict professional supervision. Amanda had missed the last 3 scheduled visits. According to her lawyer, she'd moved to another state with a relative. Skylar had stopped asking when she'd see her mother again. Sometimes children know when it's time to let go before adults do. The financial settlements had been straightforward once Amanda's fraud was fully documented. She'd forfeited any claim to spousal support, the house, or my retirement accounts. The judge had ordered her to pay restitution for the money she'd stolen from the boutique, though her former business partners had little hope of seeing much of it. Amanda had left town with virtually nothing, having lost everything she'd schemed to steal. I'd worried about how Skylar would handle her mother's abandonment, but Dr. Martinez had helped me understand that children often feel relief when toxic situations finally end, even when that relief comes with sadness. Skylar has been living with the stress of keeping secrets and trying to protect you for months, the therapist had explained. Now that the truth is out and she doesn't have to carry that burden anymore, she can just be a 7-year-old again. And that's exactly what had happened. Skylar had flourished once the pressure was removed. Her grades improved. She made new friends at school, and most importantly, she seemed lighter somehow. The worried, watchful expression she'd worn for months had been replaced by the carefree smile I remembered from her earlier childhood. I'd negotiated a more flexible schedule with my company, working from home 2 days a week. We had breakfast together every morning. I made sure to be home for dinner every night, unless absolutely unavoidable. The work-life balance that Amanda had claimed I was incapable of maintaining had turned out to be perfectly achievable. Once, I wasn't trying to compensate for a spouse who was actively working against our family's well-being. On this particular Saturday morning, As I flipped pancakes and listened to Skylar humming while she colored, I reflected on how much had changed. The house felt bigger somehow, as if Amanda's negative energy had been consuming space we could now freely occupy. We'd redecorated Skylar's room together, painting it her favorite shade of purple and hanging up her artwork. We'd turned Amanda's former office into a playroom, where Skylar could spread out her toys and crafts without anyone telling her to keep things neat for appearances. "Daddy," Skylar said, looking up from her coloring book, "Mrs. Chen from next door asked if we wanted to come to her grandson's birthday party next weekend." "Can we go?" "Of course we can go," I said, setting a plate of perfectly golden pancakes in front of her. "That sounds like fun," she grinned. And for a moment, I was struck by how much she looked like my mother, who'd passed away 2 years earlier. My parents had never quite warmed to Amanda, though they'd been too polite to say anything directly. My mother had once commented that Amanda seemed very concerned with what people thought of her. In my mother's diplomatic way, that was probably a harsher criticism than it sounded. I wished they could have lived to see how this situation resolved. They would have been so proud of Skylar's courage and integrity, and they would have been relieved to know their son wasn't the failure Amanda had tried to paint him as. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Robert Chen, my lawyer, standing on the porch with a manila envelope. "Mr. Patterson, I have the final divorce decree. Everything's official now." I invited him in for coffee. He explained the last few details while Skylar continued coloring at the kitchen table. "Amanda's attorney contacted me yesterday," Robert said. "She's formally waiving any future visitation rights. She's also relinquishing any claim to contact with Skylar unless the child specifically requests it when she's older." I felt a mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for Skylar, who deserved better from her mother, but relief that we wouldn't have to navigate Amanda's continued attempts at manipulation. What does this mean practically? It means you have full legal and physical custody with no restrictions. You can make all decisions about Skylar's education, medical care, everything, without needing to consult Amanda. And if you ever want to move, travel, anything like that, you don't need her permission. After Robert left, I sat at the kitchen table across from Skylar, watching her carefully color inside the lines of her Princess Castle picture. "Skylar," I said gently, "you know how Mommy hasn't been coming to visit anymore." She nodded without looking up from her coloring. "Is she not coming back?" "Probably not, sweetheart. She's decided to live far away and start a new life. That means it's just you and me now." "How do you feel about that?" Skylar set down her crayon and looked at me with those serious brown eyes that sometimes seemed far too wise for her age. "I feel sad that Mommy made bad choices," she said carefully, "but I feel happy that we don't have to worry about secrets anymore. And I feel safe because I know you won't lie to me." Her simple honesty nearly brought me to tears. This little girl had survived months of manipulation and emotional pressure, had found the courage to expose the truth when the adults around her were failing, and had come through it with her integrity completely intact. "You know what?" I said, reaching across to squeeze her hand. "I think we should celebrate, just you and me, our family. Want to go to the park after breakfast and then maybe get ice cream?" Her face lit up with the kind of pure joy that only children can express. "Can we feed the ducks too?" "Absolutely. And tonight, we can have a movie night. You can pick whatever you want to watch." As we finished breakfast and got ready for our day together, I realized something profound had happened over the past 6 months. I had stopped trying to be the perfect provider, the man who worked endless hours to give his family everything they might want. Instead, I'd become something better, a present father, an honest partner in my daughter's life, someone who prioritized relationship over achievement. The irony wasn't lost on me that Amanda's betrayal had ultimately freed me to become the father I'd always wanted to be, but had been too afraid I wasn't good enough to become. Later that evening, after we'd fed the ducks, played on the playground until Skylar was exhausted, and eaten more ice cream than was probably wise, we settled on the couch for our movie night. Skylar had chosen an animated film about a young girl who goes on an adventure to save her family. As we watched together, I couldn't help but think about how life had imitated art. My own daughter had gone on an adventure, a dangerous, difficult journey into adult deceptions and betrayals to save our family, and she had succeeded in ways no one could have predicted. As the credits rolled and Skylar dozed against my shoulder, I looked around our living room. The space that had once felt tainted by Amanda's lies now felt clean, honest, peaceful. We'd survived the storm, and what remained was stronger than what had been broken. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about the future. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Skylar and I would face them together with honesty and courage. We'd learned that truth, no matter how difficult, is always stronger than deception. And in the quiet of that Saturday evening, with my brave daughter sleeping safely beside me, I finally understood what real happiness felt like.